A word to the wise.
To the wise?
To the wise. What are we, Crossland?
I don't fucking know. An explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, we're through the end of
Alloy of Law, a Mistborn novel.
A
By
Mistborn
Brandon
novel.
Sanderson.
Yeah, 16 through the end. Okay, goodbye. Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words of Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers like. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should be thinking of us as your intoxicating weekly book club. If you've made it this far with us, you know, like, you should be there.
We're jumping off with some weird energy today. It's an earlier recording than our normal episodes, but we had a lot of fun yesterday, and I think we're still riding that high.
We did. I mean, if you think about it, we recorded 2 episodes yesterday, so like that's a thing. But yeah. So as PJ mentioned today, or I mentioned, I don't remember who said what. We mentioned, as we mentioned in the intro, today is our 3rd episode discussing The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 16 through the end. This is also kind of serving as our wrap-up episode. Not that there's a whole lot to wrap up necessarily. Like, there's not a whole lot to chat about immediately in a wrap-up. So we're going to do kind of a larger one at the end of the next book with Overly Average Ben from YouTube, to talk about both Shadows of Self and this book kind of at the same time. So, yeah, we're going to talk about the whole fucking book.
This is a movie of a... Yep.
It's true. Mm-hmm. But before we get too far into that, PJ, let's talk about what we're drinking. What are you having on this wondrous night?
So I got curious. I was watching bartending YouTube, as you and I are both want to do. Came across a really interesting video from The Educated Barfly talking about acid-adjusted pineapple juice.
Right.
And he had Garrett Richard on to recreate a Hawaiian Mai Tai, which traditionally is very fruit-forward and like overly sweet in balance. So instead, he created a Mai Tai using pineapple juice with acid added to it to make it act like lime juice. So this is a take on it. It's not the exact ratios because I couldn't remember off the top of my head when I was making it, and then I cross-referenced it. But you can find his recipe on the Educated Barfly's website, on their YouTube channel. Like, I highly recommend looking up that YouTube video because it's very informative and gives a lot more reasoning behind everything than what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to run through what I made mine with. It's pretty similar, but not exactly. I've got 2.25 ounces of rum. I used Smith & Cross's Navy Strength rum. 1/2 ounce of triple sec. I used a new triple sec. I think it's called Broco or something like that. Give it a shot. 1 ounce of acid-adjusted pineapple juice, which you create that by adding citric acid and malic acid to the pineapple juice to bring up the citric content or the acid content to 6%, like a lime would be. That'll get broken down much more specifically on that video or on that website if you are interested. 1/4 ounce of orgeat, 2 dashes of 20% saline solution, and then I add a squeeze of the lime juice because you use a spent lime wedge inside of the glass. Just plop it in there, swirl it around so you get the lime oils running about, and then flash blend everything, open pour it into that cup with the lime wedge, and then usually you would serve that with a mint sprig. But that's all the way in my backyard, and I didn't want to go get any. So I don't have that at the moment. But it produces this really, really weird, in a good way, pineapple-forward rum cocktail that you think has a lot of lime juice in it, but doesn't, because it has that sort of acid bite, but all it tastes of is pineapple.
Yum. That sounds so tasty. You've made it twice now, and I am exceedingly jealous of the idea, and I clearly need to get some of these acids so that I can actually make some fun juice variants and varietals.
Yeah. You can do the same with orange juice. You can do the same with pretty much any juices. Really sort of tweak them. So it's kind of cool.
You just need to add the right amount of acids. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Back half beer is corporate sellout move from Fair State Brewing Company in collaboration with Cloudburst Brewing, New England IPA. Waves of pineapple, lemon lime, and a hint of pine cone here and there, as it's described. So, haven't opened it yet, but I will be doing that later. If I remember correctly, it's very solid, hazy, a little bit more on the bitter side than what you typically find, but in a positive way. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's great. I'm really excited because of some dietary restrictions. I don't have a back half beer for a while. I'm not going to because way too much sugar and other things. So doing a kind of a thing that I've done previously in life with like rotating diets through and kind of doing a reset cycle for health reasons and those reasons and kind of resetting a lot of muscle groups and blah, blah, blah. A bunch of boring, fun gut biome stuff that like no one actually needs to hear about. But so I won't be having back half beers on the show for probably 2 months or so. So I'm sorry, folks, but I'm going to live vicariously through PJs, and I'll always have either a shot of vodka or tequila nearby as a little back half sipper instead. So that's kind of the new game plan.
The new game plan.
Yeah. The other part of that means that I'm kind of limited on the types of cocktails that I can make, which is also kind of a fun game to be playing with myself. So inside of this, what we're doing today is the first of what I'm sure is going to be many different martini and martini-esque varietals that avoid, any excess sugar for about 2 months. So here, what I've done today is a Luna Bloom martini, which is using end of days Luna Bloom, kind of that pea flower, the butterfly pea flower martini, that. What that ends up being is about, I did it a little bit differently than you would usually do kind of ratios. I evened them out a little bit more because I expected a little bit more of a flavor balance. I think it worked great. So it's even split 1.25 ounces of gin and 1.25 ounces of vodka. Typically you do like 2 and then a half or 2 and then 3/4 to kind of get there. And then a 1/2 ounce of dry vermouth. And then I added some grapefruit bitters in there to kind of even out the flavor profile. Great low calorie cocktail. And it's also really tasty. So
awesome.
Young
sounds good.
And pretty. It's so pretty.
It is very pretty. It looks like Riptide Rush Gatorade in a martini glass.
Yeah. You're not wrong, actually. I did actually put it in a martini glass because I want to ensure that I don't just down this all at once. And I wanted to make it as difficult as possible for myself to do that, since it is just straight alcohol, basically, with nothing else. So using the martini glass as a way to prevent myself from just drowning right away. Yeah.
Sculling it.
Cool. Right, exactly. Vodka, of course, inside of this is Rakia, which is the reason that I did those ratios the way that I did, because I know what Rakia tastes like and I know what Luna Bloom tastes like. And so it's like, I think I can match up these ratios and make it even, and it will work really well for the flavor profile. And I think it was successful. So
good.
Yeah. So with our drinks out of the way, PJ, before we talk about the chapters, how do you feel about this week's reading? And since we're done, let's just say the book at large.
This week's reading was lightning. Like it was so quick. Mm-hmm. But I guess that's kind of this book in general. It is ultra fast paced, and I mentioned that it's a movie of a book earlier, and I mean that. Like, this is written and paced as if it was a single film. It felt very, very snappy and very good to progress through at such a rapid rate. It's different, very different from what we've been used to in the last several book series that we've been reading, but I think in a fresh and fun way.
Yeah, this book goes blisteringly fast, which is also why it felt right to try to maintain that in the way that we read it as much as possible. We could have read this slower and like aligned a little bit more and like kind of paced it so that like I knew it would have only taken us like 2 hours to cover certain sections, versus these episodes on average have been a little bit longer than some of our most recent episodes that we've, recorded for this book. But I think that that's the right way to do it, because we get through enough content to kind of talk about the whole kind of pie as it's presented to us as we've been going. So
And what a pie it is.
What a fantastic gun-toting, rough-shooting pie it is. It's root scooting. That's exactly where I was going. I am so excited to talk about this chapter and what we have to talk about this week. So let's just not mince any words. I've already minced so many words. Let's just get into it. So with that, we'll get into our chapters. We start with chapter 16. So we open this week with a chapter that everyone read last week. And again, I am so sorry. Sorry enough that I apologize for it. But with Wayne wobbling and hobbling through a railroad station, acting the part of an old lady, he really submerges himself again like a method actor into the part of Abergain, using her to get as much information as he can on this new rail car from House Tekiel, this unbreakable rail car.
I really appreciated the inclusion of this part specifically from Wayne's perspective, because I feel like this is, I guess I can't speak for other books. Obviously, you know this, but it feels pretty unique in the way that it really shows him owning a persona in the disguises that he chooses and getting into the great details of like, this boy reminds her of her grandson that's been long lost, or whatever it is. He digs deep in this persona and really envelops it, lets it envelop him, I guess. And that's something very hard to capture on any sort of like visual media. So seeing it described here so well was really, really fun for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think one of the joys of the way that this perspective is written is it almost feels like a little bit, I don't love even saying this the way that I am, but it almost feels like a little bit meta, right? Like, think about a writer writing a book. When you write a book, you have to inhabit the mind space and your character's brain and how they think as you're going through and writing the character, right? So this is writing a character who's living in a different persona, which is kind of like writing a book within the book. So you have to take the internal language that you've developed for Wayne and then spin it into how would Wayne think about other people. And that's so cool. I think it's very unique to this story as well.
Yeah, it's, to use the terminology that you've already put forward, it's writing a character who's actively writing a character on the fly.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Just total improv acting with like good development and good base and like stuff to go off of, especially as he starts to get into the other characters. You know, it's just so great to see him hop between persona to persona to persona. And truly, I know that you were bringing in this comparison earlier. I can't think of another character immediately that's like Wayne in anything else that I've read in a long time.
Yeah.
Including this monologue. Like,
he gets so good at it. Yes. To your point. Yes. I brought it up first. It feels unique to me. But at the same time, it's still like occupying a space that we already had in the previous books and haven't really gotten to see much here, which is that of the Khandra and embodying other people, disguising themselves as other people. So
yeah, and that was different. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as you were going through and saying that. Like, it is a completely different take on the same kind of idea of occupying someone else's skin. You know, the Khandra are doing it from like kind of a literal sense as they wear the bones of someone else, and it's got that spooky ooky feeling that's great. But this has a more sort of immediate, there's also that sense of like he can fail, which is something that you didn't really feel with the Khandra. Like, they were never going to be discovered in different moments for what they were. So that gives this like almost a sense of danger to it too, when Wayne's pretending to be this old lady. Abergain.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, and about Wayne in particular, we've read a couple of book series of characters that fill similar roles. So like Severo, for instance, without getting too far into it, fills kind of a similar role of sidekick and kind of like that other energy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
yeah, that's true.
Folks, if you haven't read Red Rising, go read it and go listen to our old episodes covering Red Rising. Come on. What are you doing? Okay, Wayne is mostly made by the guards after asking some suspicious questions about the intent and manages to pull a disguise flip inside of his speed bubble, including, of course, a new hat, because we know that Wayne loves a good hat. He does this again after one how to say this.
He's got some quick turns.
Yeah, well, he's got a couple of quick turns, but after one, expends its usefulness, he switches again to the one that's going to provide him with exactly what he needs next. And it is crazy how great it feels for him to have deceived these people here, playing 3 different roles and like very much in almost a like Scooby-Doo going in and out of the side doors and like running away from the ghosts and like losing track of each other kind of a way. It feels great, like almost like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, a little bit. You mentioned that he seemed to get made by the cops, by the constables. It felt like that right away. It felt like a great recovery after a flub. But upon like further reflection and subsequent reads of it, it feels very intentional. How he drops his accent and let the guard catch him so he could run away and have him chase. Either way, it's very, very clean. It's either a great recovery and improv, or it's very great technical, like accidental, quote unquote, flubbing.
Good point. Yeah, I think the reason that my head thinks that it's a little bit more in accidental flubbing, but it totally could be intentional, and I can definitely see it's still being spun that way very easily, is also in the performance by Michael Kramer, because on the page, it doesn't really seem like Wayne's flubbed anything immediately. The guard just kind of notices. But Michael Kramer's performance, he fades from Abergane's accent into Wayne's in the middle of the sentence, if you listen, and it is so smart.
It describes it. It says dropping his accent briefly, but Michael Kramer continues it instead of a brief, like maybe a word or two, as you would think briefly dropping an accent would be.
Right.
He drops it and continues the Wayne accent.
Yeah. I'm just saying that I think that it is a little bit more. I feel like it's a little bit clearer to that point in the audiobook. Like it feels like it is one way. But again, that is like an impression from the audio medium, not necessarily and like needing to provide a voice to it more than it is like, which way do you interpret this? I don't know that it's either or, and I don't think there's a definitive answer, but it
What's
is one or the other.
Interesting to me in that is that audio description of it is what solidified for me that it was intentional. So exactly the opposite based on the exact same like medium.
Interesting.
Which, I mean, it's totally up for discussion or up for debate, but it's either way very, very clean.
Yeah. It's really great. And then the way that he executes the rest of the scene, running around him with the House Tekiel nobleman, and then kind of also painting that back in with maneuvering Wayne into the car or into maneuvering Wax into the car gradually. It's just great.
Yeah.
It's great. But, as I've already started to mention, this is really a ploy. This entire thing is going to be a ploy, which is the part of Marasi and some beggar boys shooting Wax and shooting at the group and planting some shells all over the place, and Wayne dragging him into the rail car so that he can hide there overnight for the Vanisher's inevitable theft. The shooting stops as Wayne heroically declares victory, and then the captain repeats it, which I think is funny. Like it's like he's kind of shaking it into the captain or something, like, no, we're good. And he convinces him, and then everyone cheers, and Wayne vanishes before he can be asked any questions. Like it's so good.
I love that social aspect of it, knowing that the captain would be the one wanting to take credit for any sort of win. So framing it that way as a win, and I mean, either way, the captain's going to be on the hook for it. So he knows he'll be the one to like take credit.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh man. I do want to mention something before we go into the next couple of chapters. I was going to mention this at the very top of the episode, and I totally forgot. We almost started talking about it before we started recording, but I wanted to mention this. What's also really fun to me about this series, which is a little bit different, is the fact that we know that the end is coming in November. And I also don't have the end. Like, this happened in Dark Age, but we didn't really have a release date. We didn't have an idea of when it was going to end. So in certain ways, some of the foreshadowing that I'm picking out for you, I am also kind of picking out for myself. You might not be able to distinguish some of that, but like, whoa. That's been kind of a fun revelation as I've been going through this time.
Makes sense.
Yeah. All right. With that, We go into chapter 17. We move to Wax in the cold, impenetrable railcar of House Tekiel, preparing for the inevitable encounter with the Vanishers and Miles' 100 lives. We move over to the other portion of our crew hanging out on a little hillside and watching the theft occur. Shots ring out into the night between the Vanishers and the guards protecting the Tekiel car when a giant, rigid leg moves out of the canal and grips the train car, placing it on their barge and replacing it with a replica car. We've finally seen the thievery. We've seen what the Vanishers do. I also get very big, like Toy Story, the claw energy from this.
There's a little bit of that,
but
it's
also
more, to me, it's more Lovecraftian in description. And I know that's not necessarily the case, but just the way it's described as, I think because it's called a leg as opposed to an arm.
That is such a great distinction. And it's something that I was thinking of too the whole time. Like, how interesting is it that they went to leg before they went to arm? And like, just that simple change makes it feel like it is such a foreign, like a crane even is such a foreign concept, or like
that's what this is,
very mechanical crane. Yeah. I mean, I assume a little bit more mechanized, right? Like, it's clearly got some power, and we know that batteries exist, right? Like we've got a couple of those. They describe the light that's being used on the train that was approaching, or the car that was approaching, to stop the train, you know, having a high power battery light. So there's a couple of different things here that are very interesting, but I love you calling it Lovecraftian. It is so foreign and strange to them that they really don't know how to describe it, which is why, especially in the dark, we hear leg and not arm. Calling it a leg too versus an arm gives me the idea that it only folds at the two joints versus, like, I think of, if you were to call it an arm, it would have like fingers at the end and, you know, more grippy, like at least three joints, more like the claw does in Toy Story. But
I mean, by that argument, it feels even more crane-like to me.
Yeah,
but
fair point. Most cranes are that way.
It's vaguely described, but horror evoking. Like, for whatever reason, like it is ominous. Especially because it comes out of the water.
Right. I did want to ask the question of you. Oh, fuck. I figured out what we're doing for October short pour. Oh, yeah. All right. Okay. I got a crazy idea. If other things don't happen. Anyway, I just realized that it's like horror month, so we should be doing like a horror book. Anyway, cool. So, the claw. Oh, the solving of the mystery here, right? Was this what you anticipated as far as it goes with, like, the way that the Vanishers were doing the train car robbery? Just out of curiosity.
It was not, because I didn't know what sort of capabilities we were dealing with, and clearly they didn't either. So, like, this is a new capability, but there's got to be some mechanisms that can carry heavy things. It is pseudo-industrial revolutionary times. So like cranes probably exist in some form or another in order to like load things onto this train. So the idea that it can just unload an entire train car makes sense to me, but it is not at all what was on my mind. Like, I truly thought it was getting things out of the same existing train car.
Got it. Yeah. Which
This
is kind
makes
of what it
so much
seems
sense,
like.
though.
Yeah, it kind of seems like that as we're approaching this point, right? Like they had, because the train car was the same, you know, it's like they just, all the goods were gone. And that's why it's so interesting and dramatic that they're the Vanishers. And yeah, I agree with you. I think this makes a lot of sense. And it wasn't something that I had predicted either as far as the whole thing goes. I think that by and large, this was the book that out of all of the Sanderson that I'd read, that I found the least predictable, which is so interesting because so many reviews call it very predictable that I'm like, I don't know how. I mean, like, it plays into tropes for sure. So like there are a number of like tropes and things that you can clearly see being set up, but like different plot points and like it's not all tropes.
Yeah, I guess looking at it at a high level versus like looking at it through a magnifying glass, I can see those being two very different things.
Yeah.
Because looking at it through like the primary beats of the story, I could see how that could be pretty predictable. Not looking at the granular specs of how is this train heist happening, instead of we're going to trick the gang into stealing us. and then we're going to kill the bad guy. Like, those main beats are formulaic, but the very specific things are unpredictable in my mind.
The details that make up the mystery, not the actions that are taken. Yeah. That makes sense. I love that. So the pair head off to chase down the now stolen car, and we move over to Miles's perspective as he stares over a mission mostly accomplished. But Miles knows that this isn't over and predicts that Wax is inside the train car, which is great because, as we were saying with the trope, it's this moment of where he's like, I know what the fuck he does. And he consistently says that, in order to think like a lawman, you have to think like a criminal, which means that Miles, as a criminal, thinks like a lawman. So how would he catch himself? He would lock himself in the train car, so he was taken to wherever he needed to be. So there's a lot of like great reflexive logic that's applied inside of these moments that we know and understand. But Miles is also joined by Push and Pull, the two minders from Mr. Suit, as he contemplates how he's going to have to deal with Wax. We make our way to the Iron Spine, this kind of unfinished industrial building that's crawling towards the sky, and they just begin to crack open the door on the car.
I love the tension between Miles and the Minders. The collective problem solving of how to deal with this scenario, and just the I don't actually need you here, but you have to be here kind of tension relationship. Mm-hmm. Push and Pull as names are interesting to me because it is, for me, very evocative of Wax and Wayne. Like, they feel synonymous to a certain degree, but at the same time, very like pointedly named for their powers, right? Like, Push is a coin shot, Pull is a lurcher.
Totally.
Yeah. But Wax and Wayne, Push and Pull, like it feels pointed for some reason, and I'm not sure why yet, but there are parallels that I could stretch and make, but I don't feel equipped to actually do that yet.
I think there's like a triple entendre here, if that makes it. Like, there's not just a double entendre between like the ideas and names. So obviously, I think, like you said, Push and Pull mirrors Wax and Wayne in a fantastic way. You then think about the fact that like Mr. Suit has two guards that he doesn't want to be recognizable by any sort of name or be able to be traced back to him. So he refers to them as Push and Pull. So he denames them, which is a very like gangster movie thug thing to do, right? And then on top of that, it's their innate powers, right? So like on top of that, it's these abilities that they have and how they're also distinctly opposites of each other. I mean, I think it's just, it's not like it's genius or anything, but it's neat layering. Like it's a neat little nugget in something that is also really fairly innocuous. It's also a really easy way for us to identify when we switch perspectives who we're dealing with without like needing to connect those names, because we can, in Wax's perspective that we'll get to in a minute, it's the coin shot versus the lurcher. And so like those are the distinguishing factors between the two.
Right. Yeah. Where was I? Oh, getting into the problem solving. There's one of them throws out the suggestion of just dropping the whole fucking thing in the channel, which lose the whole train car. Ironically, is the best move that they could have come up with. Like, it's what they should have done.
Yeah. I think, isn't Miles the one who says that dropping it in made sense? Or he suggested it and then also dismissed it?
I can't recall. I know he's the one that dismissed it, but I can't recall if he's the one that also brought it up, which would be funny if he did. Maybe it's inner monologue. It might not be spoken out loud at all.
Miles does suggest dropping it in, but then also counteracts himself. Actually, okay. Tarson counteracts him. Sorry. I don't think Suit would like that. And then Miles does say, yes, unfortunately, the canal is a bad idea, because then we wouldn't be able to do this thing. We wouldn't be able to get the money ever. So it is like a combination of details, which I think is nice. It's also cool, as a sidebar, I mean, I know that they've come up before this, but the fact that the canals are still around, obviously not the same because the world's been remade, but the idea that canals are still really central to the way that things travel around, pretty neat.
Is that to say that no, they're in Ellendale, aren't they?
Yeah, the city is Ellendale, not Luthadel.
Well, they're in Ellendale, but I was curious if they were actually in Urto at this point with the canals.
No way of knowing. The best context that we have in terms of like where things are or relationally changed, or the reason that we can't say that that's even true, or that we don't think that we're in something like Urto, is because of the way that all of those, underneath all those cities, all of those vaults that the Lord Ruler had built for people to like survive in, were all pulled together at the field of awakening that we end at. So like, we don't really know where it is, but we can assume that Sazed, made the canals a thing, because that's the geography that he grew up with and knew his whole life. So
yeah. Okay.
What do you build if not the familiar?
Yeah, that's still a trippy thing for me to wrestle with in my mind. The idea of a god crafting not only the world, like not only nature, but also a city. That's something that I don't have any experience with in any other fiction. Are you familiar with any other fictional like stories that include something like that, where the god figure gets that granular in crafting society?
There's a couple of things. I would say that one of the things that says it at the very least a little bit of distinction or distinctive from actually physically creating it is he like lays it all out. They still have to build it. You know what I mean? Like they wake up in an empty field. There's no city that's already there for them to like occupy. But Spook gets a document from Sazed in the Words of Founding in that book on like how to do it. And then humanity comes together, through doing that. So
gotcha.
It is like, that's the rough part. It's like, is it shaped? It's shaped by harmony, but it wasn't like physically made. Like he didn't actually mold the buildings or, anything else. So.
Okay. That makes sense. That's easier for me to wrestle with, but
yeah, at
the same time, less cool.
I mean, fair enough. In the extended Lord of the Rings canon, there are gods the Valar who build cities, or AR, whichever. The bigger gods build cities. So, AR, whatever. Rings of Power comes out.
Maiar would be like Gandalf.
Yes, the lesser. Auron is a Maiar. Yeah.
Yep.
So cool. All right. Moving on from that little side tangent. There's another little note here that I wanted to cover, speaking of religion and gods, about the Church of the Survivor and Kelsier being referred to as this mythic Lord of the Mists, which is so interesting considering the mists are actually a thing of harmony and therefore of the religion of the path. And what do you make of this sort of almost like paradox between the religions?
I had an immediate thought on this, and I'm wrong about it. But I'm going to go through my immediate thoughts of it, because I think it's kind of fun to think that way, because I'm sure I'm not the only one mistaking Lord of the Mists for the Lord Mistborn.
Yep.
Those are very similar in term, very similar in name. But I thought this immediately threw out my idea that Spook was the Lord of the Mists, or the Lord Mistborn. And it kind of fucked with me a little bit. And my conclusion was that Sazed crafted a mythology to obfuscate the true history, recognizing that a variety in religions was net beneficial for humanity in the end. That was my like justification for this. Like, how do we jump from recent history to making Kelsier once again the central point to a lot of this? And that's just not the case. This is a different but confusingly similarly named being between Spook and Kelsier, which I still think it's fairly clear that Spook is the Lord Mistborn, where Kelsier is the Lord of the Mists. God damn it. I'm going to fuck that up every goddamn time, or at least like half the time.
It's, I don't want to say great clarification. I think that's a very easy thing to mistake between the different segments here. But I also don't want us to completely... There's still something to like the overlap of names to some degree. I do think that they are intentionally these distinct individuals as we've kind of gone through. But they do have like an immediate connection through, obviously the crew, but then on top of that, the way that I think Spook has been painted to inherit kind of Kelsier's title of the survivor, like we had talked about previously. So it's almost fitting and apt that he also overlaps, and that we have this weird overlap with Mistborn to Mistborn, or Mists and Mistborn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do want to take the smallest of steps back, though, inside of this question, because I do want to focus a little bit on sort of the duality of religion here a little bit. There's a lot of religion that gets kind of, I think, in an actually beneficial way that we can talk about more because it's not all so explicit. We're given a picture of a couple of religions, right? One being Sliverism, of which we vaguely know is kind of the old religion that was worshipped under the Final Empire, that now, instead of revering the Lord Ruler, or however it might have changed, it's now Old Iron Eyes. Marsh is also alive, we find out at the end of the story. So that's really interesting. So like their god or their priest in some ways still alive and out there.
Didn't get the idea that it worshipped strictly Marsh.
Yeah,
it felt more like Marsh was a figurehead of the religion, but not necessarily the god of the religion.
I would say more, I would agree with you. I would say like less like figurehead to me means Pope, like he's there all the time. He's more of like the myth of the religion.
But he's also actually there all the time.
But he's not actually like making commandments. You know what I mean? Yes, he is still there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's complicated. It's not a one-to-one to any of the religions that I'm familiar with. And they don't reference the Lord Ruler, I think, at all.
I don't think so. Yeah.
So maybe you're right. Maybe they are worshiping Marsh, but it feels separate than that. Like Marsh is the avatar of death in some respects.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you. I was just searching to see if they said Lord Ruler at all. They do not. But it presents, again, I think this is so fascinating because we get these, I said 3, we get 4. I forgot about, so we've got these like 4 religions, and 2 of them have real figureheads that are alive, quote, through Sazed and through Old Iron Eyes, you know, and you obviously varying powers there. Old Iron Eyes does not have the same sort of power, of course, that Harmony has, and also not at opposition with Harmony. It's just that people worship him, which is interesting. Or worship, like we were saying earlier, they don't worship him necessarily, but they worship around him. They worship this idea of Sliverism. We don't have a whole lot on Sliverism yet, comparatively.
So tough to define 4? That. Because I feel like there's more than that. We've got Sliverism, the Path, were those the same?
Nope.
So
the Church of the Survivor is Kelsier. The Path is Harmony. Sliverism.
Trellism. I thought there was one more that was referenced.
Maybe those are the 4 big ones so far. Those are the 4 that get the most screen time.
What was Mare's?
Larsteism? That might have been mentioned.
Maybe.
Larstism? Yeah. Because that's the Marewill flower, right? Like the
one that might be
there.
A doodle of a doodle of a flower.
A doodle of a doodle of a flower, of a real flower that was maybe a doodle. Just something. I can't believe we didn't make this joke at the time, but you know, life imitates art, and sometimes art imitates life. I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes very literally. Okay, to get back to the core of the point, though, there's duality in the mists between the religions, right? Like there's duality between the mists in each of these religions. What do you think about that as far as we approach the religions? Like this idea that obviously we know Harmony's the right religion, quote, kind of like, is it right? Or, you know, that's what's so interesting to me here, right?
I think that's what I appreciate so much about this is that it's not necessarily wrong. None of them are necessarily wrong because none of them are necessarily contradicting each other. And they can all coexist without and taking one thing more heavily than another doesn't necessarily mean the other thing is wrong. So it's more about emphasis than it is about differences in the actual like religion itself. I'm sure that will become more and more convoluted as time goes on, but I feel like we're still early enough that there's been enough active interaction with Sazed that things will still be fairly like tame as far as that goes.
Sure, yeah, the infighting between religions. I mean, it's not as though these religions are really competing with each other. They're just beliefs that people hold, which I think is also another thing. It's not like we're not seeing religious warfare on any stretch right now.
They feel more like political ideologies than they do religions at this point.
Fair point, actually, because that is kind of the way that Asteris presents it right away in the beginning, as she's like, "Oh, you're a Pathian, so that means you think this way." And there's some of that, which, yeah, totally. Okay, cool. That satisfactory after I brought us back to it 3 times, circling that one. So this chapter,
energy, Crossland,
energy. Our chapter ends with an explosion as Wax's predicted trap is thrown at Miles' feet. He knew that this was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. And Miles' 100 lives, say one thing for Miles' 100 lives, but I mean, you can fool him as much as you want. He won't give a shit because he can live forever. Almost.
I feel like they're both so much on the same page that they were never going to, like, I don't think Wax was intending to trick him. I think he was intending for Miles to intercept him like this. Like, I think they have a very similar thought process and mutual understanding of the law and how criminals operate. And they're like just going along with it because they know the other one's going along with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the vibe that I got off of it.
Yeah, it's like the same mind meme, or like Spider-Man pointing at each other, doppelganger meme. Totally. Like, and they're like literally like doing the same thing because they just keep making the same moves. And that is also fascinating from a character perspective, to be like, I've created 2 characters of whom have identical skill sets, but completely different abilities, and how they square up against each other. And it turns out that teamwork wins the day. But, we'll get to that.
Teamwork and trickery.
always some trickery in a good Sanderson novel. Cool. Anything else on the transition here?
I mean, that's a violent way to transition.
It is a violent transition between pages. The explosion actually basically happens off screen, which is kind of funny, like the actual physical explosion and rendering of everything. Because as we go into chapter 18, we switch to Wax and he makes his way out into the room and to the base of the iron spine. Bits of like stone and scree are scattered everywhere. The dust hasn't settled yet or anything like that. It's totally just spread out all over the place. So like I said, we're kind of post-explosion, and there's the description, I believe, of the lights here, the lights swinging from the power of the explosion above is like, I had such a visual moment with, I can't remember exactly what he got. It's right at the beginning of the chapter. I'm just going to find it real quick. Okay. Most of the lights had been knocked out by the explosion, and those that remained were swinging wildly, painting the room with bewildering shadows. That's such like a great description, as like the light hits at different angles and then moves, and like just creates this almost like unctuous feel as you like get into the room.
Unctuous.
Yeah. Don't tell me don't ask me how to spell it, because I couldn't, I don't think.
No.
Yeah, no, oh, there it is. Okay, I know how to spell unctuous now. Okay. Definitely used an X. No X, folks. All right.
UNCT?
Yeah.
UOUSNESS?
Unctuous doesn't need the unctuousness. You added a ness on the end. You spelled unctuousness.
I thought there was a ness.
No, you can just say unctuous.
Did you say unctuousness?
I said, maybe
earlier?
I did. I could have.
Okay.
I might have.
All right. What is the base word for unctuous?
Unctuous. Unctuous is the base word.
There's got of uncsh.
If you want like the Latin base, it's unctus, and then the base became unctuous, and then unctuous. It started as ungerer, which is even weirder because that's very weird.
And rhymes with underwear.
Yeah. Oh boy. Oh boy.
Fourth grade humor. Let's go.
4th grade humor. Underwear. But so the lights swinging above are obviously incredible, and I really love that bewildering description. Wax dispatches a couple of vanishers, but as expected, Miles is nearly unharmed by the explosion, barely taking damage. His coat is like a little bit in tatters, but he's kind of like, come on, dude. Like, I knew, you knew. There's this sort of like almost in the beginning of the combat and approaching this, there's almost like a resignation that he knows what's going to happen, and he knows there's this sort of predictability here that I love. And I just like imagine him kind of just being like shrugging it off, like literally like, okay, you done throwing a tantrum, kid? Like,
he does have that vibe to him, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, he really just rolls with it. And it's a great point to bring up the fact that Miles is not affected. Like, he is so very nearly invincible throughout all of this. But I've got a way I could kill him. I really do. And I mean, that's basically big flathead shovel to the point where there's no like skin to contact his neck.
Yeah, if you go quick enough. Yeah. I think you said that in the first episode.
Yeah. But
I mean, you have to like fully. Yeah.
It's got to be long enough that it can't like regrow around it.
Mm-hmm. I think they had described like even he couldn't die from drowning because his lungs would heal themselves so fast. Like the physical polyps in his lungs would heal as they were like deprived of oxygen, and his body would continue to stitch itself together when it was deprived.
That answers the brain like oxygen suffocation thing then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I'm not worried about his lungs. I'm worried about his brain.
Right. Yeah. So it almost seems like, I don't want to maybe even posit this, and I could probably look it up. Someone has probably asked this question inside of the repository of information that is the 17th Shard and the Copper Mind. But it does, at the very least, raise the question for me. Even if you severed his head as the way that you proposed, would he die or would he regrow his body? Not like regrow into the old body. Would he regrow a body? I guess he'd be cut off from the metal mines unless they're like piercing his ear. So
I would think the core of the being would be the brain, and like he might be able to survive for a while if he's got like earrings and stuff.
Does he fully like baby Deadpool it?
I don't think he has the ability to regrow things. Oh no, but Wayne does.
He does regrow things. Yeah.
Wayne's able to.
Mm-hmm.
But he calls it a major pain in the ass to regrow a pinky. I don't think he's got the capability of regrowing an entire body. But I can't necessarily speak to that.
He does get like holes blown in the side of him, and at the same time that those blows happen, he heals. Like he almost seems to Wolverine like heal. Like I don't.
Can Wolverine
feel like I'm
be
pulling
like
a bit.
headset? What happens there?
Well, I think that question has been answered. Do I remember off the top of my head?
I believe that question has been answered. Like I don't know. Never seen it. I totally believe that question's been answered.
Yeah, it's definitely not in the movies. There are only a couple of ways that Wolverine has ever been killed. There's only one real way that he's ever died, but he's been, I guess spoilers for some random comic books that you're probably never going to read, but not for you, but for everyone else. But like he was sealed in solid adamantium, and like that was one of the few ways to solve him, to stop him, was to literally encase him in an unbreakable metal.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know.
So we're getting into the weeds, but can adamantium be melted?
It's a great question. I don't think so.
Well, I mean, how do you
actually
encase
can?
him?
Yeah. It was poured on him, so I assume it's got a melting point. Yeah.
So just bring him to that melting point.
That would solve bring Wolverine to that melting point?
Mm-hmm.
No, he can still heal, though. Like,
but all of his bones become liquid.
Well, his bones are adamantium.
Exactly. So bring him to the adamantium melting point. His skin will grow around it, but eventually he's a puddle.
Okay, the counter argument here, it ends up being a Wolverine conversation in the middle of talking about Miles' 100 Lives, because there is some overlap. But part of Wolverine's thing, obviously, is he heals really quickly. That includes his bones. Like, you break his bones and they heal. They can heal wrong, but they will eventually correct themselves. Like, they eventually fix, even if they're broken wrong. That's why the adamantium skeleton is so important, because it gives him super rigidity and unbreakable bones. So it isn't even a question then. So even when they've extracted the adamantium from his bones and broken literally all of him down, he still doesn't die. Deadpool has the exact same genes. Matter of fact, that's the whole fucking joke. And like, you can sever Deadpool's head. We've actually seen that many times.
So
he's kind of the meme version of the power extension.
I'm less interested now in killing him. I want to know if you can make what's his fucking name? Purple guy from McDonald's. Grimace. Can you make a Grimace Wolverine by melting his bones together and allowing his body to like form around it?
I don't think so. I couldn't strictly tell you.
I want a Grimace Wolverine. I really do. I just want a blob of adamantium.
I'm also now imagining a Grimace Deadpool, which is for some reason more real and horrifying in my head. Like, basically, Grimace is basically the turd emoji. I'm sure someone has said this before, but like,
but purple.
Yeah, but purple. Like,
he's Barney
focus
shit.
Group. Yeah. Fuck. All right, we went off topic.
All right, we gotta go back.
Yeah, we gotta go back. So, all of that said, I think when it comes to like gold and the healing ability of Miles 100 Lives, I do actually seriously, as we had mentioned before, I do question. And I'm sure someone has answered it some. Obviously, because he's a compounder, he heals differently, faster, better. And assumptively, being a compounder also eventually yields savantism in whatever the metal is.
Do you have to burn your metal through your stomach?
Great question. I think so. But the feruchemical health he can still access without ingesting it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would assume, because he can do bracers and whatever else. But I would assume that he would grow a little baby body like Deadpool. But I think he would recover a lot faster.
But only with access to whatever he has on his head.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So earrings become important.
Yep.
Again, in the series. Earrings, man. How cool. Okay. Anyway, that was a lot of speculation. It was a lot of fun. So we're just going to move on from that. That may or may not be in the episode for everyone. It's one of the wilder sad tangents we've been on in a while. Okay. Herein, we get just an excellently written fight scene. Wax fighting a fellow coin shot who we assume to be Push when he's surprised by Tarson and nearly taken out. He just dodges it as it like grazes his nose, as like a fist grazes his nose with the gun in it. That's the funny part about Tarson. Tarson has a fucking gun. He could have shot him. But instead, he tries to punch him with the gun in his hand, which is very Tarson from our understanding of Tarson. Wayne drops in from the ceiling, calls Wax muffin-brained, and then we roll along in the fight with Marcy covering from above.
Yeah, this whole fight scene, which takes most of the rest of the book, to be clear, is... I have a hard time remembering exactly what happens so quickly because all of it is so well blended together and like it there's not sections of it. It's just fluid. It's a fluid fight scene that lasts for the next 3 chapters. But like all of those things I remember, the muffin brain comment, the punching with the gun, the Marcy having like head cover.
Pew, pew, pew. Taking shots from above. I agree with you. I really like how this is kind of positioned and structured and how to kind of think about how to tackle various components inside of this chunk of the story. It's a very different fight scene and action sequence than we've seen before from Brandon up until this point. Like this is kinetic. This in a way that truthfully the original Mistborn series didn't touch, I think. I think that this shows 3 longer novels worth of refining his methods.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I felt like this was also a return to form in the description and like step by step in some of the more detailed action scenes that we didn't see since, I mean, basically since Mistborn. And
that's
a
fair.
little bit in Hero of Ages, but like primarily through Kelsier's and Vin's fighting in the first book, we get a lot of that style that I noticed here because I love it. But you're right, it is more refined.
Oh, much more. Like it's much more casual because, and here's why. We don't get something, to me, this is a small difference that is very clear that he's grown and refined the style that you like so much. For instance, this happens, I think, in the next chapter, but when he describes shooting down and then pushing up against it, he doesn't say he aims down to shoot so that he can push against the pellets. It is instead Wax quickly loads the gun, fires at the ground, and then pushes against it. Like, there's that sequence is more kinetic than describing why he would do something versus doing it and then showing the result of doing it. If that makes sense. And that's not 100% accurate as far as comparisons go, but that's kind of the biggest difference that I latch into when comparing Brandon's writing A to B.
Yeah. I think I've kind of figured out why I like it so much. It's because it gives me such a full, complete, step-by-step motion of like how things are done without breaking any of the like in-universe rules of magic. It gives me complete trust that it's done without any sort of hand-waving. I think that's why I like it so much, if I really break it down. Because what I like about it is the allomantic and specifically the Mistborn capabilities in those fight scenes. And I think that's why we start to see it more here, because we're dealing with a lot more allomantic like operations.
Yeah, and it's necessary to explain a lot of these things. Plus, something to point out here is like a lot of this hasn't really been. We've seen the blueprints laid throughout the story for Wax to have done these things. He, in the very first section that we read, he shoots the shotgun, pushes off the pellet. It's like we know that could be done, and so it's like he's given us all of these tricks basically, and he showed these tricks one at a time throughout the story without like overly relying on them or overly explaining them like a magic system. And then we see like almost, I keep using all of these other weird metaphors and comparisons this episode, and I can't stop it, but almost like a Tony Hawk pro skater trick string. Like it's almost like a trick string in the way that they all kind of move together.
Yeah.
So
combo.
Yeah, totally. It's just neat. I just like it.
Now you've just got a nose grind around the baggage claim for forever with the infinite balance cheat, and you'll get all your points.
Yeah, you get all the points. Totally. God, yeah. Fuck. My brain immediately jumped to that metaphor because that is how it feels. It feels like in a similar way that most authors would line up things like plot details or like mystery so that like you understand when you get to the end of the story, you're like, oh, I can put all the pieces together to get why we got here. This has that same energy. Yeah,
I agree with you.
Cool. So we're already starting to talk about it, of course, but the fight really begins as push and pull pose a serious challenge for Wax, and we get this incredible scene of fighting, jumping, pushing bullets that feels like it's from like somewhere between The Matrix and Wanted, between shooting, launching himself in the air, like we said, or taking pot shots at these Allomancers, trying to take them down, and taking down a ton of Vanishers as he like variously like unloads 6 shots one time and then reloads, and then he flips on one switch, and he's playing with Vindication in a really clever way. The Lurcher is dispatched by Marasi with an aluminum bullet, thankfully putting one of these two threats down between push and pull, which is a great moment and a great flex for her, who's never really been involved in this kind of combat.
Mm-hmm. Is this the same point where Vindication is used to take out Push?
That's a little bit later. I think that's actually even technically in the next chapter.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's it's good to see Marasi come in clutch, because I don't know how well Wax would have fared without that happening. It was looking a little dicey.
Yeah, very, very dicey. It was there were different moments there that I particularly loved, and that's why I love my own metaphor of The Matrix and Wanted comparison, because it does like lend itself this very like heavy gunfiring action vibes. Like we've lived in, for most of the story, like a Western, and there's so much going on here that actually moves it from like Western into sci-fi fantasy Western. Like this stretches past Western tropes and traits and what you'd expect there because of the magic system. So it's like natural that it does this, but
yeah, so. It's what it's doing for me right now is thinking about every like age in our history and what allomantic set would be most suited for like forward progress in our age. Like specifically here, we've got push and pull. We've got lurchers and coin shots are very clearly well suited for the Wild West. or however we want to call it. Industrial Revolution, Wild West, like that sort of vibe. Modern day, I would think you'd get a lot more nefarious and farther reaching characters with emotional allomancy. Philosophical times, you'd get like copper mines and tin eyes. Like it'd be cool to really like take every age and see how the like prominent allomantic or feruchemical set would be best represented.
I think that's why Mistborn does, and obviously again we're kind of talking about this because we're at the end of this book, but like I think that's why Mistborn is so ripe and like rife for Brandon's plans. Like he is doing almost exactly that. Like that's what he wants to do. He wants to show these different ages and how the magic system, how like a world with magic would grow over time, which I think is such a, it's not that there aren't any sci-fi fantasy books that like really get into like magic in space. I mean, you don't have to look further than Star Wars, which is arguably the biggest one. Although we don't ever really see like the foundational stuff. They're almost always spacefaring from the beginning. So that's a little bit different. But the point being, like, you almost never see that kind of a thing. And I totally agree with you. It does make you go like, oh, I love that you brought in like ancient philosophers, because it'd be pre-Lord Ruler, right? Like it would be such a good dig. Yeah. We do know, I mean, this isn't necessarily a spoiler, but like this is the unplanned era, so to speak. And era 3 is going to be a spy thriller, like 1970s-esque. And so like that lends itself to like a very different vibe.
That will be a different vibe.
Yeah.
That'll be super cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting though. Like the concept of like going from boom to boom to boom, and like really kind of taking in these different, as the world builds and changes. You know, it's not to say like big changes can't happen and that like maybe Brandon settles on something else, but as he had planned it, you know, 3 eras: first era, spy era, space era. So, yeah. Okay. Anyway, I love talking about this shit, so I'm so glad that we're finally at a point where we can start to. I was wanting to talk about this so bad in the first series as well. Like the idea of Mistborn is so cool. Like the overall concept of what he's doing with Mistborn is incredible. Very smart, very intelligent, and very approachable, which I think is really great. Because you could jump in here and like it doesn't really. Compared to a lot of like series that you might start in the middle of, it doesn't really ruin the previous series. You don't know who the Lord Mistborn is. You don't know who the Survivor of the Mists is. You don't know who Iron Eyes is, even if you went back and read the trilogy later.
Such a good point. Good point.
All nicknames.
Mm-hmm. Is Sazed ever mentioned by name other than Harmony? No?
No, I think he's only ever referred to as Harmony. I'm technically incorrect, but it's interesting because it is Marsh who mentions him at the end, but says Saze, not Sazed.
Okay. So, like,
that's as close as you get to a solid hint, but I think even if you went back and read it, you'd probably be good with this book in particular, at the very least. So, okay, moving on. I love the theory behind a lot of what we're going through now. Wayne, of course, inside of the scene is also off on his own, playing his little Bendo alloy shenanigans and fighting with a number of the Vanishers with his dueling canes, of course. But isn't sure that he'll be able to take them on forever. He takes dynamite from Marasi and sprints over to his friend, planning what to do next. They throw the dynamite, and Wayne drops the speed bubble right before it crosses into the red-blue shift. That would have been way too much for Brandon to explain, and the dynamite knocks out many of the remaining Vanishers. So he throws it and then drops the speed bubble before it crosses the threshold to kind of explain some of those complications that could arise. We see some of those later as he avoids explaining red shift and blue shift, the idea that like one point is moving faster than the other, and so you'd get some weird wobbling because of timey-wimey stuff. But
I mean, that's exactly how it would react here. I mean, red shift and blue shift is a concept when you get close to the speed of light in physics. So things traveling one direction faster than, or close, like much like the Doppler effect with sound.
Yep.
You can. Same thing happens with light. So something coming towards you looks more red and then starts looking more blue as it's going away from you. I think. Might be opposite.
I would assume red-blue. I think you're right, but
It's been a long time since I've...
Because it would move past you at red, and then you would see blue, right?
I think which has longer wavelength. Red, infrared, short wavelength. So it would look...
Yeah.
The wavelength looks shorter coming towards you because it's compressing itself. And then longer as it's going away because it's elongating itself wavelength-wise.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's why you see that stretching variously in Interstellar, right, along like time curves, and that's why like in our theories of black hole and that like stretch is a red-blue shift visualization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Cool to see that implemented here because that's exactly what it would be like. Like that. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love this, and it's why things are getting kicked around when they go through barriers. And good on you,
yeah,
Branderson.
And why like the mists are curling at the edge later, and like there's a lot of stuff here. I think that is something that I definitely want to give Brandon credit for. Obviously, you're giving him credit and credo here, but like he does, especially now at this point in his career, right around when this book had started, he had gained enough of a fan base and reputation that he really spent a lot of time researching different things and trying to provide better like representation as well, and like better representation of different sort of like mental illnesses and conditions that people are born with, or develop different to varying degrees different sexualities over time, and his reverence for science and like the importance of him bringing in physicists and chemists and like trying to really explain as closely as possible without also like trying to get it within a reasonable sphere. It's not as though any of this is possible, of course, but like trying to bring it into something that is adhering to a set of rules, restriction. Yeah, but the rules of his universe, right? Like it's not universally applicable, but it does at the very least bring in our understanding of a lot of other science so that it is grounded in as much reality without it also breaking the fun. You know, like he's grounding it all without like sacrificing.
I don't think that there are any fundamental rules of the universe that are broken, like the rules of our universe that are broken by his universe. He adds rules, but they all interact with our rules as opposed to superseding them.
I'll agree with that.
For now.
Yeah, for now. I mean, within kind of spectrum of things, right? Like there's a bunch of magic systems, even if we think to like Elantrians, right? Like they do adhere to physics generally, like Elantris and whatnot. But like how grounded is the Aeon door, you know, magic
and
system?
How tied is it to the center of the planet that they're on as far as reference planes go?
Location. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like there's, well, it is tied to like where they are located, which is also fascinating. Like anyway, point being, there are a lot of like grounding rules to everything. And I think that you do it justice to say that he's more tacking on additional rules than he is rewriting fundamental rules. I think that is
it's not necessarily a hard and fast, like concrete absolute. Those are opposite. It's not so much an absolute statement, but it seems to be a general sort of philosophy that he's following.
And in terms of like a PolitiFact true false meter, my brain goes mostly true. Like that is almost completely true. It's mostly true. But that's the nature of like storytelling. It's not as though I'm saying that he's breaking fundamental rules at any point, but there are obvious base differences in his reality versus shit. We'll get to it eventually. I don't need to say more than that, and you don't know more than that. So
as soon as we get fucking bananas flying through the air, I'm happy.
All right. So we are left with our near final confrontation between that of Wax and Miles. Wax manages to push him back into the cart where he drops the nets, on him from earlier, ensnaring him so that he could be managed better and so they could kind of take him away inside of the nets. Miles, of course, has another trick up his sleeve, kind of literally, where he pulls out a stick of dynamite from his cigar cage and blows himself out of the cage, like an absolute crazy person is fully want to do here. He, emerging from the flame, begins a bit of a villain monologue that echoes a familiar conversation and maybe even conversations about godlyhood and godliness that we've heard in the past from various characters. So I want to read that little bit here, and we're just going to read the dialogue. So, is there any doubt that I have been chosen for something great? Why else would I have this power, Waxilium? Why else would we be what we are? And yet we let others rule. Let them make a mess of our world while we do nothing but chase petty criminals. I am tired of doing what the city tells me. I should be helping people, not fighting meaningless fights as prescribed by the corrupt and the uncaring. Can't you see? Can't you see what important work we are doing? Can't you see what we're meant to be doing? Perhaps even ruling? It's almost like we, with the powers that we have, are divine. After he finishes that monologue, he punches Wax in the gut and Wax manages to get out of the way after taking, quite a beating here and push against a piece of machinery to hide behind some boxes and collapses for a brief moment.
What a great little monologue. My one complaint, I guess, is there's not more action backing up his philosophy. Like he speaks very nobly and in a way that I can totally get behind, but we don't get a lot of action from his perspective of things that he's actually doing to help people like he's talking about.
Yeah. Right.
You can prove me wrong if you want, but it feels a lot of like all bark, no bite sort of.
I wouldn't go so far as to say all bark, no bite. I do think he is currently acquiring resources so that he can then go bite. And like currently he is a tool. He's an extension. And so there is a lot of barking without him having actually done the biting. And I definitely understand that. And I can see that parallel. But I think that he does so fervently believe this. And I do believe that on a long enough time frame, if Miles weren't stopped, he would have turned against the set and turned them into enemy number one very quickly. Like there are a lot of characters and villains that are like, they become tools and they're always like, well, one day I'm gonna fight against him and I'm gonna get him. And you almost never believe them. It's like, no, you are consumed by your own, oh my God, not entropy, the opposite, when you're rolling down a hill.
Inertia.
Yeah, you're consumed by your own inertia, right? So they're just going to continue on the path because that is the easiest thing to do. But Miles actively feels like he's fighting those paths as much as possible, and like he would turn on the set easily.
I can agree with that. I think that this story would be so much more complicated morally if this was like the second big thing that Miles has done, and we saw a net positive out of a legally ambiguous first thing, a smaller one. But we got to see like his intentions in a very like concrete way into this bigger set that he's currently in. I think that would have made for a much more complex character that we could have actually struggled to, but actually gotten behind. Yeah. Because I really like this character, but there's just not enough to like grip to in the like proof that he's being a good person yet.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Or that his intentions are for like a good end mean, right? Like
prove his intentions.
He's not really an Adrian Veidt. Like Adrian Veidt has like a couple of bullet points that he hits to like show that he has the best of intentions, but is doing something awful to get there, right? Mm-hmm. He never stretches to that sort of grandiosity.
The beginning of that.
Right. This is,
nipping him in the
cutting
bud.
off. Right. Yeah, this is cutting off Veidt before he becomes wealthy.
Yeah, we had that whole conversation about like the rules of the world being upheld. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about dynamite causing fires.
I said that. It's not actually said in the text. And I realized that when
was.
No,
I thought there
it's
were
not.
flames.
No, it's not. I just visualized flames when I saw it. There's no flames.
For some reason, I visualized flames too. So
I did too, which just means that Michael Bay has infected our brains.
And it got me mad that there were flames.
Yeah.
And apparently I'm wrong about that.
No, I mean, some other things might be on fire later, but I don't think it's ever because of the dynamite. It's always smoke scree stone. Like it's always the cloud. It's never the...
Okay. Maybe that's what
it's force.
Is.
Yeah. Again, this is written so blisteringly that it's also hard to remember because you're just like, and the next page, and the next page, and then like, I need to go fast. I need to go fast. Mm-hmm. Channeling your inner Sonic. I am nothing but like a pile of other media metaphors today, and I can't help myself. Sorry, folks at home. Hopefully you've seen the media that I'm referencing. So far, we have, let me think, Deadpool, Wolverine, Grimace, Sonic, Wanted, Mage, Watchmen. There's at least one more. He flew out. It looked really good, but I saw him escape to your left. Anyway, point being, so many references all over. Oh, Red Rising, I guess you could also say at the very beginning. So many. Lord of the Rings. There's your 10. I made 10. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure you can tell, I am overjoyed to be reading these books because this is so good.
It's really good.
I love it. So we go back to Wayne fighting a bunch of Vanishers himself again, dancing that bend alloy dance of time, which really makes for such a fun concept inside of combat. We've said it before. I'll say it again. I'll say it forever. But he sees the Vanishers wearing the Vanisher, wearing his lucky hat. Tarson, of course. He comes to realize that his friend has been hurt and ditches them, making his way over to his friend, dodging bullets and noticing the coin shot is holding Maricy's weapon and does what he thinks Wax would want him to do, to go help the girl, to go help Maricy. It's just nice to see this moment of his like internal ethical and moral clock and like doing what he knows his friend would want him to do. It just showed like Wayne, a lot of the time is this interesting combination of like selfish and selfless. And this is when that selflessness that it feels like Wax has instilled in him since his days of crime and killing that family, like comes through. And it's like, fuck, I have to do the right thing. Even if it's in a stupid, silly little bit of like, do I get my hat or do I save the girl? Like, it's important to save the girl.
We haven't talked about my like lack of propensity to trust characters in a while.
True.
This immediately upon hearing that one of the bad guys had Maricy's weapon, I'm like, fuck, she turned on him. Like she was a plant the whole time. That's what I thought my first time reading through this. Right at this point.
Okay. That makes sense.
And I thought that for a long time until basically the real reveal that like she's hiding from him. Like until the climax of the fight. I'm like, fuck, she... Or wherever it is.
I mean, there's a point where we get Pole, you know?
That's before this.
Yeah.
But like...
But at the very least, I'm saying that I feel
Miles isn't necessarily on the exact same page as the suit and the set.
Fair.
Like, okay. I was able to justify it for myself, and this felt like a very good turn. I'm glad it's not the case, but...
It also, in a small way, and we haven't talked about the moment, you know, where like Maricy seems to be captured. Like we assumed at this point from Wayne's perspective that Maricy was captured or like taken, as you know, Wayne obviously runs for him or her, and I think that it is so subversive for Brandon to have it's a little bit subversive to have put in this idea that like she knew that she was made and so she dropped the gun and like ran away, and that obviously that like lack of information and communication between these two characters would create this like small gap where there would be some like serious decisions that are made incorrectly. Like this is not all going according to plan. Mm-hmm. It plays against like some tropes.
True. I would think the other assumption would be that she's dead.
Yeah. Right.
And like, yeah, go find her, but I'd rather go help my friend that I know for sure is still alive and needs help, as opposed to going and seeing if I'm finding a body or a person hiding.
Yeah. But Wayne knows to go help her first, regardless. Like, even if she's like injured or something, it's like, go to her. So, yeah. I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I get you. I get you like little first glance skepticism. It makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But we move from Wayne back to Wax, and he's injured as the mists begin to pour in through a hole in the ceiling that was made earlier when Wayne and Mary, he awakens to a little voice returning to him, and it's a familiar voice, the voice of a god. Sazed, or Harmony, is here now with Wax and lending him aid in the form of a familiar box. What do you think of our godly boy's real return to the story in this thought, conversation, monologue, and like physical manifestation of like bringing Wax's shit to him here? What'd you think?
Wild. Very wild. And what I appreciated was it was void of an I can't do that because of rules set against me. It was more of a I won't do that because of rules I've imposed on myself, which feels very Sazed. Like it feels true to the character that we've come to know and can extrapolate upon into a godly figure. I can totally believe that this is the same character that we've grown up with through the first trilogy.
Yeah, can I append a little thing to that? I think on top of what you're saying, I think it also shows that like Harmony, and Marsh makes a little bit of a mention of this later, doesn't try to put his fingers on the scale that often. Like he tries very hard to not break his own internal rule set and therefore like outbalance one thing or the other, because he naturally is the god of two opposing forces combined into one. And so he tries his best to, represent harmony in maybe the long scale, maybe the short scale, but,
Yeah. And I mean, that kind of brings it into the divinity point in Miles's monologue. There is a balance that has to take place, and there are powers that clearly exist in the world. And if Sazed is the embodiment of harmony, it's in his best interest, and it's his job, I would go so far as to say, to make sure that the good and bad that wield those powers are balanced. So in a sense, if I'm following that thread correctly, I can totally get behind the argument that they have a bit of divinity within them, in that they were chosen sort of to wield the power that they have, or they've been molded in a way. But then again, I don't know how much is actually changed. Like, we know that Sazed, when wielding the power of preservation, was able to change things within the world, including that of humanity and including that of like basically everything. Could that also extend to how allomantic and feruchemical powers are disseminated? Like, it's probably still genetically, but it's still not necessarily every time. It's a chance, but could it be a chance influenced by Sazed?
Yeah, a fair point. That you are asking great questions that I think get to some of the fundamental things that are very interesting about the cosmology of the Cosmere, and as such, the gods that inhabit it. Right, like the idea. The things that you're talking about are some of the most fascinating things about this. It's hard to separate. It's not hard to separate. There's so many good questions that this poses that it makes you like sit for a second and start to chew over divinity in a very different and also kind of like rules driven way. Like, what drives the divine truly here? Because there seems to be some other essence. Maybe there's something fundamentally there, and I can't give you an answer yet, and I can't really talk about it, but it is one of my favorite things to contemplate. So if you ever have a thought in context, you need to bring it up, because it is one of the most interesting things to talk about inside of the series. And while I won't immediately point to it all the time,
it's super cool.
Yeah.
It's super cool.
And our godly boy, he's earned his own title. I did want to mention that the actual conversation that happens between Harmony and Wax is great, because it's like, this is really weird, and Harmony's like, yeah, it kind of is. Like,
I liked the Michael Kramer performance on this, because it's Sazed's voice.
It feels so warm, almost to like return to that. Like a hug.
I felt that absolutely.
I totally agree. Okay, to wrap up this chapter, we may have thought that Maricita be easily captured, as we said earlier, but we find her smartly evading the coin shot, who was likely coming for her by abandoning her metal rifle, and she's really fairly kind of lost in all of this. There's very much like a first trauma experience of a soldier being in combat for the first time. It's all very new to her, despite her doing so well up until this point. She's captured by Miles and Pull, and Miles wants her to scream for him, scream for Wax. But Waxilium Ladrian shows up, fully locked and loaded, and blasts Miles in the side with 2 shotguns in like an epic moment to end a chapter. Like, how do you not pick up the book at this point and just finish it until the end? Like, you cannot set it down at this point.
I would have expected you to end here. If we were to break this up into 6 episodes, you would have ended here.
I mean, fair.
You would have. Like, I know you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. Or I would have ended on the dynamite going off. Like, that would have been the other one, and then this would be your final episode. But, yeah. Total.
Yeah. What guns a-blazing.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, it's the hero jumping in. Like, it's tropey. It's absolutely, like, tropey and stereotypical in a way, but not in a way that I want to complain about. Like, it just feels awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Knight in shining armor to a certain degree as well, but with guns.
Right. There is this degree of like, he shows up, kicks ass, and takes names.
Save the world, get the girl.
Interesting, especially with the way that this ends. But I mean, I understand exactly what you're going for. Yeah. It does like hit those moments and has that energy about the entire situation and interaction. But I just love this idea of like him walking up fully like 2 shotguns on the shoulders, and then like both of his hands just decked out with another 2 revolvers, his Starions at his side, and he's just like ready to go. Like, just there's something almost, again, Neo from the Matrix-y in the elevator sequence, like very much like I'm untouchable.
Mm-hmm.
So It's great. It's really cool. All right. We move into chapter 19.
Oh, I was going to talk about my idea for more weapons or more ammunition for Allomancers that we could create. Imagine like a deer shot, like a shotgun slug that's made of ceramic with a metal core that you fire and then push upon to create birdshot, but in a controlled way where you can wait until it hits a certain point and then explode it out. There's a lot of cool stuff that you could do with like manipulating ceramic bullets with metal like inserts.
That's a great point where you can, and this is already kind of happening in the way that we see Renette's constructions being used, in various creative ways. But there are so many other cool ideas. I love that idea because it's basically like a timed, to some degree, it reminds me of a flat cannon, right? Because flat cannons basically do that, where you do the initial launch of the mortar, and then after a certain distance or time, but after a certain time, then you get the flak explosion on extra to like take out aircraft. So but it'd be kind of the same thing, but manual.
And only like it makes Allomancers still have an upper hand in a world with guns.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think is so interesting here too, is that guns do level the playing field in a way, but they don't fully. Like it's tough because it feels like in the story, part of the idea that I feel in this story is that like Allomancers are less and less powerful for a couple of reasons. Distance from the bloodlines over time, the reduction of total powers that people have, and some of the different things that kind of influence the way that allomancy and powers exist inside of the story. And the improvement of technology to match or to begin to approach the level of power of the magic. Like we're just seeing that encroachment start now. So there's a question of like, when does allomancy become something that's almost secondary to the story? Like,
and I don't think it will, because I think no matter what, however technology evolves, allomancy seems so ingrained into the world that there's always going to be an upper hand in basically anything. I would have expected technology to advance to oppose and exclude allomancy. So I would have expected in a world like this, we'd be dealing with like hand crossbows.
I think that's aluminum bullets, right? Like that's kind of the idea of the aluminum bullets, aluminum gun, especially because aluminum is a metal that is so prevalent that
right,
like,
but it's so expensive and prohibitively expensive to the point where like technological advancements would have gone by like the least common denominator. And I think it would have gone hand crossbow first. If I were to like estimate the progression of the world, I would have gone less metal as a result of metal existing and being manipulated by allomancers.
Mm-hmm. And as we kind of see, like almost no one wears anything. I mean, you and I don't wear things daily that are metal, that belts. Much metal at the very least, right? Like a belt. Yeah. But, for the most part, no one's really wearing that much metal. So like that's not manipulated against them.
My boots.
Yeah. What I meant, like right now, aluminum is rare, but very clearly, who's to say that it will be rare forever? Who's to say that like mining operations as like other technology develops, aluminum it was super uncommon in the Final Empire. It is much more common now, and it is only going to become potentially more common in the long run. So with that fun conversation about metals out of the way, we move into and kind of the bullets technology. There's so much fun shit to dig our teeth into here. That's why, again, like I think that it'll be even better. I know that I'm kind of breaking up my own routine of talking about the chapter title, but that's why I'm also very excited for the wrap up of the next book with Over the Average Men, because then we can talk about kind of the whole thing, and it'll be kind of a nice approach to kind of take in everything with the books. So also he's a Brit. We've got like we're gradually acquiring guests from every
corner of the world.
Every corner of the world. Yes. Every English-speaking corner of the world so far. But, yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited for that. That'll be fun.
It's going to be great.
I know
I'm super
nothing
pumped
about him.
He's awesome. He's great. So, we re-engage with the story. Wax able to get he and Marcy away from Miles, and they catch up to Wayne, who is slowing down. The Wix quickly dispatches the coin shot using the ceramic bullet, and then Wax takes off on his own to find Steris. And I can't help but really feel So I started blasting meme in this moment when he goes and he's like jumping up the stairs and makes himself lighter and then heavier. And like he was really kind of like launching himself around the room, pushing off the nails in the stairs to like launch himself up 2 floors as he goes, and just chewing off heads and, like point click heads as he's going here, switching guns and destroying. Yeah, he's clicking heads,
Yes.
But he is truly chewing through the Vanishers here like hot pudding.
This is like peak superhero Wild West vibes. Like this is exactly what you would think of if Superman went to the Wild West and like had to try to blend in, but shit was starting to go down a little bit too much. Like this is how this would go.
Yeah, that's a great call. It is like supernatural Punisher in moments, Judge Dredd-esque, not quite that sort of like level of extermination or violence necessarily immediately, but there is, I love the superhero comparison where it is kind of grandiose in that same way. And I think I've come to recognize as read more and more books that from Sanderson, that like, it is definitely fantasy, but it's almost fantasy by way of superheroism a lot of the time. Like, I think that you calling that out is actually a lot more apt than we've given it credit for in the past. Mm-hmm. I think there's something to that.
There's something to that, but it also feels like this is the book where he was trying to get away from that, which you and I have had conversations about on and off air, about how the Mistborn caused a problem in like trying to write a good antagonist. And being able to like break that down and kind of wash it away and have a more complicated story by breaking away from the like end all be all of power.
Yeah, right. The Marvel problem of you face off against the same people, right? I think we talked about this with Zane in particular was like our one comparison in the past, but like facing off against someone with the exact same power set is as interesting as seeing two people thumb wrestle who have equal capability. You know what I mean? Like it is more interesting than that, but that's basically what it is, because there's no advantage, there's no underdog, there's no like strategic positioning. It's not like a game of chess where you have different pieces that are left on the board and you have to angle at each other and try to like fight for different positions and whatnot. Instead, you're coming at it from, level playing fields.
From level but different playing fields.
Yeah.
Everybody has a unique. Or are you describing?
I'm describing Era 1 and like Zane versus Vin. Here, yes, the completely different playing fields, right? Like that's what makes this so interesting as we faced off against Push and Pull and Miles, is that all of these things kind of create a different confluence of like everyone has abilities, but they're so different for the most part that like it's fun. It's lively in a way that the Marvel villain problem, like Iron Man 1, where it's big suit Iron Man and small suit Iron Man fighting each other. It's like there's no difference. This is just for flashy, which is cool. I still love the movie, but this is very different than that. That was the core point. All right, Wax manages to make it up to Steris and the bald abducted gunsmith that we'd spoken about last week, Noxel. I think it's Noxel. I don't blame Kramer. Kramer gets a style guide on how to say names, so I don't think it's Kramer's fault. But I don't think that Noxel's right because of the way that vowel switching works. But noxious is not spelled
Nuxel?
anywhere near this way.
I would call that Nuxel.
Right. Or Noaxel, even.
Maybe.
Anyway, point being, it's fine. I'm not that picky. It's just, especially, I'm still hung up on Teome versus Teleme. Yeah, Telemu. Yeah, right. Just anyway, getting back to it. Noxel, who he promptly shoves out the window with steel push to get him to safety. It's fun that he throws a gun at him and is like, okay, goodbye. And he launches him out the window down into the canal. It's only a 30-foot drop. Like, he'll be fine. But yeah, it's just a very funny, like, I don't have time for this. I can't hold both of you. Goodbye. He does a lot of like, Wax does a lot of like interesting pushing and pulling, almost like pulsing between different points to create like almost a rhythm as he's like bouncing between until he breaks through with this increased weight to blow a hole in the ceiling to let he and Steris go out of the room they were ambushed in. And then he collapses the entire building by using all of his weight that he stored in his metal mind to make him, I think it says like 1,000 times heavier, right? He uses all of it and just sends the whole thing crumbling down, killing almost every Vanisher that was left in the process.
Yeah, it's astonishing and a very, very cool show of power. It's something that I kind of wish we would have seen more of through Sazed in the first book, because it made weight feruchemy feel so much more tame in comparison. And I know he was primarily a copper mind user, so he had a very limited amount of like steel that he was dealing with. But even then, this is an extreme that we didn't get to see in the first book, and I'm so glad we're seeing it now. But it feels almost like a different power in that respect.
Some of that is the combined impact, though, of allomancy and feruchemy, right? Like the ability to
compounding.
Yeah, right. Like the ability to use these powers in conjunction with each other, I think is an important thing to not ignore at the very least. But I would say that as we also had talked about Vin being the most skilled Mistborn, there are likely more skilled people at each, more skilled Mistings at each of the individual metals potentially than Vin was at some of them, right? So I think to that same degree, having to only learn two things is easier than juggling as many as Sazed was. So I agree with you. Like, we never got to like quite see this degree of like feruchemical awesomeness, but it is so great to have it here.
So this brings up now, sorry to cut you off a little bit, but I was done thinking about it and I'm going to lose it if I don't like blurt it out, is the comment from Miles talking about divinity, talking about like us. And he's very pointedly talking to Wax. And I had always taken it to talking about someone twin-born at the very least, or specifically somebody like allomantic or somebody feruchemical in general. But he's talking to Wax so specifically like this, and they're the two people that we know of that are twin-born and use the same metals for both of them. Yeah?
Twin-born compounders, yes.
So, there is something different about that. And I still don't have a firm grasp on the rules of compounding. I know it's been described and I just need to go back and reread it, but it feels a little bit less solid still.
Yeah, I mean, to give you like a rough approximation, the extra power of compounding comes from the ability to burn a metal as allomancy that you have feruchemical power stored in. So recall in the first series that Vin couldn't burn Sazed's metal mines and get anything outside of the base allomantic ability, right? From
I don't think she could even get that.
The metal itself. I think she could burn it as bronze.
No, she was blocked. She had the feeling that she should have been able to burn it, but she couldn't.
You may be correct. I don't want to double check right now. We'll leave it to what you said. I'll agree with that. But at the very least, unusable to an allomancer. And so this actually allows someone to use that combination, the sort of harmonious powers of preservation in the moment between feruchemy and allomancy, and combine them into a burst of version of the power.
Okay. That's fair.
That said, when burning that metal, so far as we're aware at this point, what you activate is not just the like push and pull capability, or like the push capability of iron, or the pull, whichever way you want to. Yeah, iron push, steel pull, right? Steel push, iron
steel
pull.
Push, iron pull.
Iron stores weight.
Oh,
yeah. Iron Mystic is known as a literature.
So they're not compounders.
He is not a compounder. There we go. I didn't think so, but I was so close to believing. Okay, regardless, though, to talk about compounding, since we're already kind of on this topic, when you burn the metal that you're storing, which is what Miles does a number of times inside of the story, it doesn't burn like an allomantic metal exclusively. It burns as a empowered version of the feruchemical ability. So burning the metal mind in your stomach gives you that increased healing ability. So that's what gives it, because you're also consuming the base metal. You don't, so like Miles, likely to our understanding, would not be staring at a bunch of versions of himself at the same time as he's healing himself with feruchemical gold and compounding gold.
Okay.
Cool. This is a side note that I need to add the feruchemical glossary to the bottom of this so that we can make sure that that stays straight. It's all good. Okay.
Yeah. So he's not compounding though.
Correct. Yeah, he's not a compounder so far as we understand it.
Okay.
Because he's got
that
steel and iron.
That theory.
Entire point. We love you dearly. So finally, we arrive at our final confrontation between Wax and Miles, these two law keepers. And of course, it's a familiar situation to the one that we found ourselves in right away in the prologue of this novel. Tarson holds Marcy, gun to the back of her head. Miles stands in front, blocking the path of a bullet, and really an impenetrable object kind of standing in the way here. And as Miles counts to 3, Wax, on the final count, calls for a bend alloy bubble from Wayne, who obliges, and Wax takes a second, fires a bullet from within the bubble at Tarson that exits the bubble, so goes from the blue to red shift, and then as he's watching it kind of on progress, and he does some like physical math while he's inside of the bubble to think about the angle that he needs to hit this at, he then has a bullet that he aims, turns on his steel to push, pulls the trigger of the gun, calls for the time bubble to be dropped, and launches it in so the bullet ricochets into Tarson's head, freeing Marasi from the grasp of this villain as he has this kind of a retake on the prologue.
So this kind of, first of all, very, very cool, especially the buildup that we've had. I figured something like this would happen after we've been talking so much about how unpredictable it is to shoot out of a bubble. Mm-hmm. But I think Wax is in the very particular case where that shouldn't actually matter to him, as long as he has the time to line up and like push the bullet, because it's going to stay at that barrier for him. So if he's pushing on it, when it gets dropped, it'll have some forward momentum, but we can make the argument that if he's pushing on it for a while, it's a buildup of momentum from his perspective that can overcome any of the momentum it already had.
Mm-hmm.
As a fired shot.
M1 so versus M2. M2 moves faster than M1, uses it as a platform to bounce.
Yeah.
Bullet 1, bullet 2. Yeah.
But he's in a unique position in that he's able to manipulate it at the barrier point, whereas almost anybody else wouldn't be able to.
Completely unreliable for anyone else. Yeah. The only difference you might see from the other side is if you had a lurcher on the inside of a speed bubble like this, pulling on a metal from the outset so they could direct something downward. But then that'd be weird because you would wait for it to like get through the bubble. It's an interesting interaction to think about.
That would work less predictably.
Yeah.
And therefore like not
as effectively. Yeah. Yeah. That's a fair point. So such a cool moment. Frees the girl, frees not the same woman rather, but a similar sort of situation, is escaped and evaded. And it's kind of like a moment of redemption from the PTSD. And it does ruin Wayne's hat, to your point. As he brings up, of course, a little bit later.
Why'd you have to shoot him in the head?
Why'd you have to shoot him in the head? It's such a good bit. You know, it's funny because there's a part of me in these moments that's like, I think Brandon made the right call, but I still ask the question of like, would this be better without that moment of levity in that immediate moment? Like, would it have like a little bit more of a gut punchy sort of like redemption, or is it better to have the hat joke from Wayne? But the hat joke is so in character. Yeah, like I think so. I just like I do at the very least like sit here and contemplate like, is A or B better? And I don't have a firm answer. I think instinct is I enjoy hat joke. Hat joke's good.
Hat
That's
joke,
cool.
Hat joke. Hat
joke. There's an important conversation that I don't think we ever had on the show, but it was something that popped up inside the Discord the other day. There's a difference between like excellent and fun. Right? Like there's something like some things can be like excellent forms inside of their media and like really exemplar of like everything you want to do. And then there's writing or like movies or storytelling that's just a fucking good time. And like at the very least, like even if you don't appreciate anything else here, this story is a great time.
Oh, absolutely. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
But I also think it's excellent.
Yeah, I do too. I'm just saying like even if you don't think it's excellent, I think you should think it's a good time.
They are two separate things. But this one's both.
Right. It's kind of like it's an A or B, but both switches can go red or green. Yeah, that was a silly metaphor. We're fine. I didn't make like a silly Sonic the Hedgehog comment, so we're good. The fight turns into a bit of a bloody brawl between our antagonists as they get it on here. Wax blows out the man's tongue, which eventually returns and heals, but it's kind of a funny moment considering how much of a talker Miles has been up until this point. The slugfest continues across the room. Obviously, Miles can't be bested in most one-on-one combat due to his nigh invulnerability. And so we kind of turn to a solution at the end here that we'll talk about in a moment. But I love the reflection that Wax has in the middle of the bout here as Miles is espousing about his morals. And he thinks that in the past, Miles would have been a good guy in that world of old. And he would have been fighting what he thought was a big form of oppression and is kind of the hero in his own head. And to me, to bring in the only reference that I actively wrote into my prompt, he's very Rorschach-esque in this moment, in the way that like he believes he's doing the right thing despite potentially causing way more harm. There's sort of a duality here of character in a similar way to what Rorschach experiences in Watchmen that I really, really enjoy from this sort of lens of conversation, and from also Wax realizing that, like having that inclination.
And I think what makes this argument fun for me is that it allows for total speculation, because this isn't a character that could have existed in the previous book, with the exception of the Lord Ruler through hemalurgy.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is by design a character that couldn't have existed. So it's total speculation from him and from us, which makes for a very, very good like argument to be made.
And it makes sense because he was a good guy before. He was a lawkeeper before, you know, like he was on the side of sort of the righteous law, if you want to put it that way.
Even
before
the
this,
righteous law people that we know from the first era have some moral ambiguities that they have to wrestle with in order to do what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the whole problem with Elend. It
wasn't a bloodless revolution. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes such an interestingly complex character to be on the opposite side of. Again, comparing Mistborn Novel 1 to this book, we went from a heist novel to like the detective novel of trying to break down and tracking the criminals and the heisters. And there's a nice duality in the stories here. And it's just, I think we run parallel paths, especially in this moment as he recognizes that. So
true. We do.
Miles heads to grab Mercy and run away with her when, you know, the damnedest thing happens. There's been subtle hints for the last couple of bits of the conversation as the combat's been going on that something is kind of a little bit off about the arena as we look out on the edges. It becomes clear to us that Mercy has used her ability to create this I don't want to call it an anti-speed bubble, create her own slow speed bubble, slow the internal time of the area so that she could wait for Wayne to return with a legion of constables to arrest the invulnerable man. Just physically outpower him.
I mean, imagine that. That was cinematic for me.
It's a fucking cinematic moment, yeah.
To drop the bubble and it's like light pours in and hundreds of constables are surrounding them. Like, it's a less comedy, but still evoked the feelings of the end of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the police just show up and arrest everybody because they ran out of money and they couldn't do anything else to finish the movie. Like, that's why that happened. Mm-hmm. But it's such a like an ingrained ending to a film for me that that's what I thought of here. But just it's in context and it makes sense here, but it's still oops, all the constables are here kind of like reveal.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only like the flourish that I imagine, the only thing that I can imagine adding to this moment is as like the light floods back in, it's like a sunrise, right? So like they've been fighting through the night and the sun comes in for the first time, because it's been that difference between like the sun cresting, like being close to the horizon and actually cresting it. And like, that's your time that you actually see to communicate the 15 minutes that have passed inside of this bubble to pass all that time. It's so good. Did
they give an amount of time? I thought it was longer than that.
No, it definitely can be. I want to say that there was an equation that was like 1 minute inside of the bubble is equal to 15 minutes outside of the bubble. So that's why I brought up 15.
I thought it was like several hours. I thought it was like almost a day that Wayne was able to go and collect all the constables. I thought that was
it totally could have been. I definitely am not remembering at the moment. PJ can't find his book, which is extra funny to me. Nice. What's funny here, too, to mention is it's also because of the way that light interacts with the bubble, we're blue shift, red shift, which is funny. So as opposed to like our average understanding of things, like this is an inversion of the other speed bubble, right?
Right.
So we see that collection of images hit us kind of all at once in a sped up version of everything that would have happened as it interacted with light. And then the image of what's current arrives. So it's the inverse of the blue redshift.
Yeah. And she talks about how they cancel each other. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me from like a side note perspective, because I believe Maricy's bubble this might be where I'm getting the 15 number from. I think it's 15 feet wide versus Wayne's is 5 feet ish. So there's more range on one versus the other. So I'm like, that's interesting because
she said it could fill a small room.
Yeah. I want for some reason my brain is
15
gravitating
feet
towards
makes
15.
sense.
Yeah. I think it's in 20. It's got to be in 20.
It's got to be.
Because I just read most of 19 through the end. To your point, though, of gathering everyone up, I think it's got to be hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think just from the concept of even like trying to get someone on board, it's got to be hours.
I remember thinking about it after it was like after reading it and felt like a day.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember thinking about what Wayne was going to do for a day while dealing with this, but I can't find it. Okay.
But I would imagine it's several hours, to your point. While you continue to review the pages, I'm just going to count down here on my own. Don't worry about the clap.
I'm not going to find it. But
okay.
I think it was in conjunction with the conversation about how if Maricy was found out and if Miles had noticed, they would have been like hours away from any help. It was something like that.
I think that's right. I think that there's some like subcontext that is given beforehand to say that they're so far away from people, even if they heard the shots, it would take so long for them to show up. And I think that is long before the end of this chapter. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, with the vague understanding of the idea of the cadmium bubble and sort of the time manipulation there, we can say it was a couple of hours. But I love the description of the red shift, blue shift. I love this moment of apprehension, like this moment of which he is apprehended is so great. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's so well thought out. Brilliant use.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the practical use after the adamant description of it being a useless power. So
yeah, totally.
Off the dome, we came up with a bunch of like useful uses of this.
We came up with a couple.
before.
Yeah. And that's why I was like, there was a back part of my brain that was a little bit concerned that you'd come up with the solution here in that conversation, but obviously we didn't quite get there. So, all right, with that, we go into our final regular chapter. We've got an epilogue to follow this, but it's a pretty quick one. Our denouement here is pretty powerful and pretty wonderful. We started off with Wax and Maricy calling it quits, which is interesting. Not that they were together or anything like that before, but Wax firmly drawing that line in the sand. And he cites that it's not only age within his own head, but there are other reasons too. He kind of internally monologues about the scars that he carries and the damage that he has, and how it's not right to inflict upon a young person. And from Maricy's perspective, it's sort of a somber moment that Maricy's plays as like misunderstanding. And there's some like misanthropy there that's interesting, but there is some like deep personal hurt. I think that's all based on youth.
Yeah, there's that. I really like the way you've described it so far. I think one thing to dig into a little bit more, which I think the text describes it even better than the way that you paraphrased it, and that's the comment about Wax saying if he was only 10 years younger, and it not being to do with age, but baggage collected over that time. And I think that's a perfect culmination of what he's feeling here. It makes total sense to me that it's not about how much older he is, but the amount of experience that he's gone through and the trauma that he carries as a result.
Yeah, they have very different lives. They can't run together forever. And it's not to say that they ever were like together by any means, but he wants to ensure that she's not led on as much as possible. That's what this is. And it's sad, it's unfortunate, but it's real and important. So
exactly.
Breton, the constable general, though, inside of this moment, also decides to deputize our little waxy boy and enables him to basically be a different type of lawman entirely, one responsible and capable of actions that the police might take, but like doesn't need to like run a beat or anything like that. Like he doesn't need to like rule over an Octon, but he can pretty much act with impunity inside of Allendale, which is crazy. He's like a sanctified Batman. It's a pretty sweet break for Wax kind of going forward. Wayne makes another trade, of course, that we kind of see in the background. We get the thing that we talked about last week with Wayne's trades of like, you know, they aren't exactly fair or even clear as to how he thinks of them as even, but it's fun still, of course.
Mm-hmm. This ain't Breton.
Oh, okay.
There are several comments about like him acting weird.
Okay.
And not acting like in conjunction with what you would expect. This is a Chondra. I am almost certain of it.
Okay.
So that is me putting a flag in the sand at this one. This ain't Brett.
Holy shit. Sorry, folks at home. You're not listening to that much Dead Space, but at the same time, I have to mark this as a prediction all of a sudden because PJ decided to make it one.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I mean, fair enough. I think that there's some notes there that like he's thinking differently because all of a sudden he's in charge and like he didn't have to be before, but sure.
But he was. He was in charge of everything.
Patreus was in charge of everything before. He's the inheritor to Patreus, but it's okay.
I'm not going to take the time to like look through it, but there are some very like suspicious comments.
I'll give you the prediction for sure. I'm all for you eventually drinking for this. So like,
okay,
we're good.
Cool.
And there's also a nice, sweet, somber moment here that kind of punctuates the end of this chapter between Wax and Steris as they settle their affairs in post of this traumatic experience between the two and the kind of abduction and rescuing and kind of everything that's going there. Steris begins to kind of drop her shield that she's held up for a very long time and this guard that she's held and reveal who she really is here as they progress and decide to continue with an actual engagement. You know,
it still feels pretty rigid. And like there are some concessions made within the contract as far as timeline goes. Like there's nothing really,
but it all softens. Like it's like you took the butter out of the fridge and like you got some understanding and you put it out into the open and like it's becoming spreadable.
You just saved her from being a concubine. Like, of course, there's going to be some like softened emotions there. It's not. I don't know. I don't think I can make a comment on like her truly changing yet because this is rescued from trauma.
Yeah, agreed. And I was trying to clarify. I don't think that she's like fully changed or anything, but there's sort of a dismantling of some guardrails that were there before. They didn't really get each other on it like almost any level in their first interaction, and so they have like no mutual experience between conversations between the two. And now through a demonstration of sorts, there's a lot more understanding. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm intending by my thoughts here, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like they're in love. Like, it's definitely still a contractual agreement. We aren't staring at insta love or anything like that. But it is, at the very least, a little bit more accepting and a little bit more familiar, but not nearly the sort of instant chemistry that Wax and Marisi had.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I do apologize if concubine is the wrong term for what she was being held as. I don't know the proper term for like baby factory.
Which is sort of, the way that the contract laid it out in a very kind of, I understand.
Not the contract, what she was like kidnapped.
Oh, yeah, we don't know. We don't even know what she was kidnapped for. So like on top of that, assumption there.
Well, I mean, the assumption of what she was kidnapped for. Like,
got it. Okay.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that she was becoming Wax's concubine. I was saying that Wax rescued her from being a concubine.
Got it. I thought you were implying her being Wax's concubine. So this is a great clarification because I was like, I can understand
I saw the look on your face.
It's a little, okay, all right. As long as, she was obviously saved from something. We don't know what. You assume Baby Factory. We
Wax
kind of have some lines.
Factory.
Fair point. Wax assumes Baby Factory. You assume Baby Factory. We know that bloodlines are important inside of it, so makes sense.
Yeah.
But it sets up more to come with Steris and Wax at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from that, we go into our epilogue here to kind of end this. And I've got a couple of things to say, but this epilogue, I think, is brilliantly paced in the way that it hops between perspectives and manages some of these different moments that are very high intensity. Again, we've said it before. I'll definitely repeat it. This feels like a film more than any of the other books did. And this feels like the way that you would see these scenes cut back and forth and hopping between the perspectives entirely. But talking about it, I want to try to not approach it like a film and try to talk about the story beats completely as they are from perspectives. So we're going to start with Marasi, and then we'll move to Wax. So, that said, Marasi is attending Miles' execution, and the man is this is sort of like a very intense and dark scene here that we see between them. He's not between them necessarily, but just in terms of the context of the novel in general. It's an execution. It is kind of a dark moment, but it's something that, I mean, we've seen the Ska execution all the way in the beginning of Era 1, but this is justice on the other side of it, and it still feels wrong. Even though it's the right people doing it, it still feels dark and bleak and wrong. He's of course shot repeatedly until he dies, some residual metal that he's burning inside of his stomach, but he shouts something before his sort of brutal triple tap execution. He says, "You are fools. One day the men of gold and red, bearers of the final metal, will come to you, and you will be ruled by them." And after being shot a couple more times, he says, Worship Trell, and wait." What thoughts you have about his comments on Trell here at the end, and thoughts about the final medal?
The men of gold and red, bearers of the final medal, is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we know of currently that Trell points to as far as gold goes?
No. Stars?
No. I see that.
That's it. That I can
anyway, though.
What's up? Yeah, more silvery than gold. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, Trell is a weird one to pull, but we know he worships Trell. It feels like there's something so big here that I do not have any context for. But it makes sense that anybody with this particular twin-born capability is such, like, at such an advantage for any sort of conquering. Like, it's setting up something, some bullshit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It definitely is. It's a setup for sure. I would say that, shouting specifically of red and gold, no idea on red, can't make any calls there, but Men of Gold feels like he's almost like particularly saying himself, as though like there's some like internal reflectiveness there. If I think about the use of gold, right? Like gold, either way, is either healing yourself from wounds that you receive, or it is seeing yourself in some kind of way. So it is very autonomous in design. Like it is very much your own side of things. So part of me sees the gold as like a self-obsession thing, maybe, but maybe it's connected and there is something between the gold and red immediately. I'm just seeing gold in particular as like this thing that almost maybe Miles might be associating with something that he doesn't fully understand. Hard to tell.
This feels prophetic.
Mm-hmm.
More than actual knowledge.
Sure.
It feels like an external prophecy being expelled.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that for sure. It's tough. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. Next up for Marasi, we go into Marasi feeling very compelled to chase down a figure after the execution when robed in these black and gray robes. And it's almost like it was encouraging her more than her usual curiosity might have sought to chase after something. She finds herself in an alley with old Iron Eyes himself, Marsh, as we've talked about before. And he has a warning of sorts, or maybe information. Warning might be a little bit too strict here, but his information to Paxton to Wax, and thinks that the safest way to do it, of course, is through her. It's a small book with more information for the both of them in their coming adventures. Any thoughts on Iron Eye's intervention almost here, like giving this information as it seems kind of outside of Harmony's immediate will?
It does. It feels outside of Harmony's will, but Harmony's will is so laissez-faire to begin with. What I find very interesting about this is this feels supernatural. Not in the allomantic and hemalurgic sense that we know him to possess, but it feels omniscient. It feels like he has information that he shouldn't for some reason, almost as though he's been imbued with sort of the, I don't know, there's some extraplanar powers that he's dealing with that's allowing him to compel Marasi, that's allowing him to know the intricacies of their personal lives without directly intervening with them. Like there's it's tricky. Like there's something different about him, but I don't know what it is.
It's cool to see Marsh back in the story at this point. It's kind of a nice entry point to like actually see another old character return. And of course it's the other guy who could be immortal, as you predicted, which is great. I will definitely be taking a drink at the end of this episode here, but it begs a lot of questions about a lot of things. And I think that's also why we talked a little bit about this offline, but part of me believes that Brandon wrote the main threads of this story for the most part with the intent of this being a single novel. And then he saw all of these sort of dangling artifacts that he immediately thought of extensions to like keep it going and was like, well, I have to. I feel like I gotta explore all these things to their fullest extent. So,
and I think there's a lot of language and a lot of just like little things in this book that come through almost not jokingly, but more jovial and more Easter eggy than what I think we would have seen if he had intended for this to be a trilogy to begin with, or intended for it to be like the basis of another
saga.
Series.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And that doesn't take away from the story itself, but I think there are just like little things here and there, artifacts, as you mentioned, of that first intention. And I can't imagine the epilogue existed in that first draft.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I believe because of the way that chapter 20 wraps up, it wraps up with almost a perfect denouement. I can imagine maybe a different scene that you'd have like Wax and Wayne staring off into the sunset for sure to kind of end it all. But other than that, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay. That's Marasi's side of the story. We now move to Wax's side of this epilogue. So Wax takes a train to Dryport seeking someone unknown for but a moment to us when it's revealed that his uncle Edwarn is still alive and walks into the room. There's a lot here inside of this section, but what does it make you think about the set, the kidnapped woman, his sister, and the future of the series, having this reveal that Edwarn is Mr. Suit, and we get all these other, like literally in the span of 2 pages, the entire book is kind of flipped upside down in a moment. What do you think?
I mean, I had assumed that there was something more to the death of his uncle. I hadn't quite considered that it was insurance fraud and faking your own death.
Fair point.
It's simultaneously genius and hilarious that this is the entire motivation for like this nefarious crew. I still don't quite understand the tension between the two characters.
Sure.
It feels like it's something that had been building for a long time. Like they were in bad blood to begin with, and it didn't get that in Wax's reflections on his family previously.
Sure.
So that threw me for a little bit of a loop, and I'm not sure what to make of it yet, but I'm excited to see where it goes going forward.
I think like just I don't want to call it a counterpoint, but a little bit of a rebuttal to that is that the conversation that happens here between Edwarn and, of course, our boy Wax. So I don't know if it's bad blood in the family history so much as it is the situation that he was left with. Like the damage that he caused, I think is enough to build resentment, because Wax, it's not, even though it feels like we've only been in this story for a couple of weeks, realistically, we're closer to a year in total time elapsed, somewhere between 9 months to a year, given the distance between Prologue to chapter 1 to chapter 2. So I feel like that's resentment from the situation that he was left in because he had to leave the Roughs, which was also good for him because the death of Lessie wasn't sitting well in his head. So like there are a couple of reasons that it's okay, but it's kind of like, you dealt me a shit hand, man. Like, and I can feel that emotion.
Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah. But yeah, okay. Other than that, it feels like there's some undiscovered stuff there as well, I would say. Like we're not fully there on their relationship for sure. It wasn't something he ruminated on because he wasn't really there. So it didn't make sense to. Mm-hmm. So, all right. You didn't mention the set or the kidnapped woman or his sister. So,
oh, his sister's still alive too.
Yep.
And is being held. I mean, I didn't mention it because you didn't mention it, man.
I mentioned it in the fucking question.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned all of them.
All of them. I said it all. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. It leaves... I still believe and am in agreement with the initial assessment from Maracy that this is a nefarious farm for Allomancers. That is kind of at odds with the explanation that we get from the suit here. But in the words of Kelsier, there's always another secret.
Invoking the Lord of the Mists, huh? All right. Fine. I'll take that. All right. So our final moment to talk about in this book is a conversation that happens between our eponymous pair, as the title of the series is so aptly named, after Wax and Wayne. And it's a promise that we get from Wax to end the story. Wax would see this to the end. Ruff's honor. When one of your own went bad, it was your job to see the mess cleaned up.
Mm-hmm. There's some fun conversation that you're skipping over here.
Oh, there's a lot of fun conversation. I'm just giving, like, we're at the end, right? Like, you can definitely talk about all the conversation. Yeah.
I love the Ruff's honor invocation. I love the idea that the lawman, like, code extends to family as well. It's not just like one of the lawmen, it's one of your own, and that includes like, my family's fucking up, let me clean this up. Like, I love that code is evoked, but I want to talk about the fun conversation.
I mean, do it.
The goofball sort of like Sly talking about like, how'd you get this note, how'd you get this little book, table sweep. Like,
or the like, I owe you 5 notes, and he's like, you owe me 15, and it's because I bet that you would help me on this, and you're like, fuck, I forgot about that from the very beginning. You know, there's some good shit here.
There's some good shit here. Could I get a dictionary definition of the word eponymous?
So it's self-titled. I don't think I actually need to Google that, but I will just double check.
No,
yeah. Giving your name to something, so named after someone or something. Okay. The example is literally the eponymous hero of the novel, which is hilarious. Or Roseanne's eponymous hit TV series.
So titular in another word.
Yes.
Like the story titled after a character.
Right.
Okay. I don't think it fits here.
It does. It totally does. The series is Wax and Wayne. It's not. I mean, it's also referred to as Era 2. That says a Mistborn novel in the front, but the whole thing is referred to as the Wax and Wayne novels before he called it officially Era 2. It's fine. Okay. Leave me alone.
All right. Fine. I don't know it as a Wax and Wayne novel.
We've referred to it as
across my desk yet.
Yeah. Well, it's also because I didn't want to spoil the names of the characters like immediately. Like I didn't want to spoil shit, right? So like I referred to it more as Era 2 than I did the Wax and Wayne books because they're kind of interchanged.
Understandable.
So yeah,
but
I did my best.
It's a good place to leave off with them, though.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good joke. Like joke crescendo into the ending with like a final beat, almost as I've said before, like staring off into the sunset as we cascade away with the idea that like we are going to be returning for a sequel. Like this is Wax and Wayne will return in 2023 or whatever it is, you know, very Marvel-esque, and that's okay. I dig it. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Cool. Anything else that you want to say about the book?
I'm fucking right about Marsh.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, okay. PJ's predictions, to get into that. Yes, PJ's prediction, is anyone still alive? I kind of turned this into like a reverse Deadpool that I'm going to be keeping for the rest of the series for you. Mm-hmm. You said Marsh would still be alive. He's got all the spikes, presumably can access the combinations that the Lord Ruler had to stay alive for thousands of years. If anyone, it's him. Cheers. Yep. The rest of the shot went down the hatch. So, yeah. That was the only prediction, really, that we kind of had inside of this book that wasn't immediately paid off. I did expect that and kind of anticipate it because of the pacing and sort of the way it's written. Like, this was never going to be a prediction book. I don't
direct interaction with.
Okay, here's my thing. I take your comment on obviously Sazed is alive as being so obliquely obvious that I cannot count it inside of your prediction. It is so 100% correct without any sort of assumption. Like, there's no assumption there. There's no risk. So yeah, no. The other two parts, I
still think Kelsier's kicking somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't. The comment of I don't think anyone else could still be alive has a caveat, depending on how Khandra work with their blessings. Does the same Mist Wraith come back as the same Khandra if respiked? In which case, if that's possible, I think some will come back. And some that didn't despike themselves would still be around. But most of those were like slaughtered very, very easily.
Yeah, right. To that point, I'm going to add this in as a new prediction, of course, and kind of keep this as like a running thing for the story as we progress. So, for the time being, and I will date your calls and different things as we move forward, so that we kind of have an idea of when you made those decisions and thoughts.
I'll contradict myself. I'll fucking do it. I know.
You do it all the fucking time, man.
All right. It's true.
It's good. We did, PJ, we finished another book in an astoundingly short period of time, comparatively. And so we absolutely briskly ran through this one. So with that, we start our next book next week, and we are reading Shadows of Self. This one is going to be covered in 4 episodes as they're broken up. Again, I'm hoping that we have the calendar repaired before this episode comes out. When I was talking with Tim, it sounded like that was going to be a thing, so that should be good to go. Worst case, again, it will be on our Twitter. You can find it there. Again, to repeat it here, Prologue through chapter 6. I double-checked everything this time before putting any of this down. I did a double-check before this episode. It's exactly where I wanted to go. No more change-ups, no more special adjustments. So, schedule set in stone.
Perfect.
So, that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as ever, to our producers, Tim and Andrew, for helping us keep our show going. You can check out the links in our show notes where you can find our schedule, our Patreon, or maybe our schedule, as Crossland just mentioned. Schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, websites, all of our social media accounts, all in one very nice, convenient location.
Yes, and in case you didn't know of those various locations, Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, we're at Reddit, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com, patreon.com/Words and Whiskey, t-shirts on TeePublic, although that will be probably changing pretty soon. So get them there while you can. Otherwise, we'll have a new kind of link up instead of our links, which you can find at wordsandwhiskey.show/links. You can find everything in one convenient place, like PJ had mentioned before. That'll include links to Atomic Pylon and all of the other shows that we're doing and producing, including Short Pours. We recently read The 11th Metal, as well as had an interview come out with both PB Doodles and Sean from the Howler Project, Howler Initiative. So we're going to be talking about that. You'll have both of those Short Pours for your access. A 2-for-1 month. Like, come on.
Mm-hmm. It'll be fun.
So, yeah, for sure.
I still haven't listened to that interview that you had because I was not present. So,
fun fact: we're retaking it tomorrow.
Oh,
you knew this, right?
I did. I knew this, and then I forgot about
this. It's all good. Fucking Riverside. That's all I have to say. It was supposed to come out literally 3 weeks ago. So cool. With that, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.